All right. That will start our Selma City Council special meeting. It's March 4th, 2024, 4:30 p.m. in the Selma City Council chambers at 1710 Tucker Street, Selma, California, 93662. Teleconference phone number is 301-715-8592. The webinar ID is 891-6864-5005. When on the phone, if you wish to address council during the public comment portion of the agenda, press star 9 to raise hand and we will select you from the meeting queue. Press star 6 to unmute and mute yourself. Would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Guerra.
Here.
Councilmember Mendoza Navarro.
Here.
Councilmember Trujillo.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Cho.
Here.
Mayor Robertson.
Here. Potential conflicts of interest. Any council member has a potential conflict of interest may now identify the item and recuse themselves from discussing and voting on the matter. Agenda changes or deletions to better accommodate the members of the public or inconvenience in the order of presentation. Items on the agenda may not be presented or acted upon in the order listed. Additions to the agenda may be added only pursuant to California Government Code, Section 54954.2b. Oral communications. At this time, any member of the public may address the City Council regarding any item on the special meeting agenda over which the council has jurisdiction. No action or discussion will be taken on any item not on the agenda. Issues raised will be referred to the city manager for review. Members of the public are asked to limit their remarks to 3 minutes. Do we have anybody who would like to make oral communications tonight? Do we have anybody online or on Zoom who would like to say anything at this time? With that, we will start our study session, which is a capital improvement program, otherwise known as the CIP.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Bear with me here while I bring up the presentation on my laptop here. But in general, first I'd like to thank all the city department heads for helping me put this together. It's been quite a long time coming, and identifying the projects that the city should be pursuing over the next 10 years isn't necessarily the easiest task, but some items are more obvious than others. But at the same time, there's also a matter of where's the money going to come from, and we'll get into that in a little bit here. So, City Clerk, do I have the ability to share? Okay. All right. So the way that we decided to organize the capital improvement program is with these 5 main categories that you see on the screen and in your packets. Public safety, parks and recreation, streets and infrastructure, public works and maintenance, and administration. And there's a note there that indicates that storm drain infrastructure, which would normally be included in the streets and infrastructure category. We haven't identified those projects yet. Simply because we're in the process of developing the storm drain master plan. And so once that is developed, we will be able to identify what projects to include in the CIP at that point. So the first category, as I mentioned, is public safety. So, the mayor brought up at the last council meeting the need for substations in various other parts of the city, and which coincidentally, staff was already discussing the need for, because, as the city grows, I think having strategic locations throughout the city for police presence makes a lot of sense. It's something that not only do we have to identify the locations, but also identify what other uses could be combined with those substations, whether it's, we also have, fire presence or ambulance presence or other city administration present at that same location. So what we've identified over the next 10 years for police substations is a $13 million cost for a northeast police substation. And we're hoping to be able to generate funding by fiscal year 26-27 for that amount, and then potentially a smaller substation in the southwest in the year 27-28. Any questions about that item? And by the way, feel free to ask items as we go, or ask questions as we go along.
So when you're talking about the fiscal years, you're talking about 2026, year 2026, year 2027?
That's correct, yeah.
Perfect,
Mhm.
thank you.
So the next item, PD parking lot fence. And so this particular item is something that I think was planned and, long before I was here, when the city built the police department next door to City Hall, and converted the parking lot that's behind City Hall into a parking lot for, police vehicles. We have had some issues there where, police vehicles get broken into or they get, windows, smashed. City staff does use that for additional parking as well, when there's open spaces left by the PD vehicles. But it does present a security challenge to have that, wide open for, for public access. So that's one of the things that we would like to address in potentially fiscal year 2026, 27. The other item, and Chief, feel free to jump in on any of these as well to provide additional details.
If I may explain this
Sure.
next one,
Mhm.
sir.
Yep.
So the next item is the Cellbrite Tower for years 27, 28, and 28, 29. What that is, that's equipment that allows investigators to essentially access cell phones or electronics that we recover through search warrants and things of that nature. Currently, those items go out to the Department of Justice lab and or some other law enforcement agency that has the ability to access those items. However, with us in the city of Selma growing, we want to be able to have that access in-house and have trained personnel that are able to complete those tasks, which is going to expedite our ability to recover data and get a better investigation much sooner than later, which increases crime solvability. So that's the reason for the Cellbrite Tower. And it's not a tower. It's just like an equipment within the equipment room, if you will. You want me to keep
Go
going?
ahead. Yeah.
Additionally, the next item was the surveillance enhancements. So as we are asked to build out the law enforcement or public safety platform for the future of Selma, we are going to heavily, and I believe our best ability to meet the growth needs that the city of Selma will be looking for and will experience will be our ability to rely heavily on infrastructure when it comes to technology, software, analytics, and things of that nature. So by making investments now, it's going to increase our ability to make our current workforce and expanding workforce much more efficient because they're going to have the tools that are going to enable them to do much more efficient investigations, which saves times. And again, like I said, we'll go to crime solvability. And lastly, for the police, I'm sorry, not lastly, for the police department also, in 25, 26, we will have to meet some new legislation guidelines that are coming, that were approved in 2000, I believe in 23. We have until 2026 to meet those new regulations, which would make our current radios digitally encrypted as opposed to, and I apologize with the current encryption. I think there is no encryption. It's not as secure as a digital encryption, but we would have to convert our radios over to digital encryption per state mandates that will become effective by 2026. Thus, the $200,000 investment for portable radios. Just like all equipment, this equipment is just extremely expensive. However, their lifespans are typically pretty good. We're getting 10 to 12 years on that equipment. So we feel confident that with the purchase in 25, 26, that should take us into the foreseeable future. And lastly, our tasers. When, we're going to budget for tasers in this fiscal year. However, with the addition of body worn cameras and technology advancements, we chose to forego that to allow the ability to purchase a better tool that would be would work well with our current body worn cameras. It would be, and I can't think of the word right now, interactive, the integration would be much more efficient, and we'd get a better product on the end result. And we would put those costs amortize over 5 years, again, because that equipment is expensive. However, we do believe the lifespan on those would be 10 to 11 years. So we would pay for them for 5 years, but then we'd have them for another 5 years. And then we would then again plan for future purchases to replace that equipment. Or if new technology comes out that makes it more viable for law enforcement. And that is it for the law enforcement public safety side, unless you have any questions.
If I have a couple of questions. Okay, for year 24 to 25, so we're looking at just about 75,000 for surveillance equipment, right? You're not looking at anything more than this?
So we're looking, ma'am, this year, in this fiscal year, we had approved some monies for the camera
Mhm.
enhancement. And then we would look again in next year as well, because even if we start the program now, the way equipment's coming in,
Mhm.
it's taking so long to get it up and get it onto the pole. So we're asking to kind of delay those costs into the next fiscal year. But we feel strongly with our improvements this year and next year, it
Mhm.
might be time to sit back and go, okay, what new technology is coming out, and then how do we optimize our current program and enhance that? And then we can, in 2 to 3 years, come back and say, okay, we need to make another investment with the hopes that it's not as significant as this investment. And a large part of that was that my predecessors brought surveillance cameras to the city and did a phenomenal job doing that. But technology has advanced so quickly that
Right.
it's time to take a deep breath. We know that the new technology out there is much more viable for us, especially the way we do policing. Policing has changed in the last 5 to 7 years immensely because of technology
Right.
and then case law and things of that nature. So we want to be able to be smart with our monies, make the current improvements now that's going to make it much more viable for the monies and for those dollars. Take a deep breath, and in 2, 3 years, maybe come back. And those investments should not be as much, we're hoping.
Okay.
Just depending on technology.
I'm just wondering because the way, technology is moving so quickly, wouldn't it be, because you're looking at year 27, 28 for the Sailbright Tower. I'm just thinking, wouldn't you want to consider moving that a little more closer to maybe year 20, even 25, 26?
I mean, I would love to. The reality is we'd have to train some personnel
Yeah.
to have the ability to use that tool. I really try not to purchase tools that aren't going to be used because they become expensive paperweights. So changing the culture of our organization to accept those technologies and use those technologies is always your biggest hurdle, right? Nobody likes change. Right now, we're on a big push to really utilize more technology.
Mhm.
Our personnel are doing a phenomenal job, but again, there's technologies out there that would be included in these $75,000 that we're not utilizing right now. So as we implement those technologies and those tools, allowing our personnel to get comfortable using those tools and then add the next layer
Sure.
of that improvement.
But is it fair to say that there are cities already using this tool?
On the Cellbright Tower,
Mm-hmm.
to be honest, typically only Clovis PD is the only city other than the district attorney's office. And Fresno County, I don't even think Fresno County Sheriff's, I'd have to, but there is no small city using this technology. We would be the first. And I think we're the first to plan it and
Yeah.
put it on the CIP project because it is a very technical tool to
Mhm.
use. By pushing it to 27, 28, it allows us time for our personnel to get up to speed with that technology and feel comfortable using it and then see immediate results with it.
Quick question
Thank
on
you.
parking lot fence, just to clarify, would that be the fence, the existing, where the cars are parked existing? Or would it be that little triangle too behind the, just, east of the
It's
city?
this parking lot right adjacent to City Hall, yeah. And so you're talking about the Mill
little grassy
Avenue.
knoll
and-
there.
Yeah, so that one, you'll see it on the list for engineering or infrastructure capital projects. So we have grant money to turn that into a park and ride lot. And so which will make ADA accessible improvements to that so that people can park there and visit the police department or City Hall from that parking lot.
And then the police substations, good to see them on the CIP. Can the cost for those be partially defrayed by impact and development fees? for the developments in those areas?
Absolutely. And that's really one of our preferred funding sources for a facility like that. For example, Amberwood specific plan, I think they have some community facilities planned in that overall development, which I think includes a police substation, and Deputy CM could correct me if I'm wrong. So as that develops, that's going to be partially funded with development impact fees. But in the Southwest, we're getting some subdivisions being planned out there. So we'll make sure the point of this, and I should have prefaced this before I started, and I apologize, but these numbers, they're really rough estimates, right? And they're always going to change, and probably get higher. The goal is to get to a solid enough number that we can put into our development impact fee program so that we can charge these developers, these costs as we go. So, and that'll be kind of the conversation after this is how are we going to pay for them? Well, one of them is updating our development impact fees and making sure we're identifying these projects specifically so the developers know where their money's going, right? But hopefully that answers your question, Mayor.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Yes, sir. Deputy CM.
The other thing I would add is by identifying projects, apart from impact fees, you could also condition projects to give dedication of land for those facilities as well, which is a cost built into this estimate, right? So the acquisition of land is separate and apart from just construction. So you would give likely credit to a developer for dedicating land for a substation, which is just as good as an impact fee collection, right? So understanding that we are looking for land for a substation in the Southwest or the Northeast, having them on our CIP helps staff to work with developers to obtain assets that go towards that number that's up on the screen. So
Legally, does it make the city a little less vulnerable to a developer lawsuit that some of them engaged in for unreasonable development and impact fees
I mean,
by
we always-
having it in a CIP?
I mean, we always have to have a nexus and proportionality to whatever it is we're doing with exactions to developers. So whatever we would do, likely within a development agreement, it wouldn't just necessarily be a condition of approval saying you have to dedicate a whole acre of land. We would state that that acre of land is able to be somewhat reimbursable through impact fee credits for their project, or we would do some sort of development agreement to identify the cost of acquiring the land and what the calculation is in relation to the impact fees that would have otherwise been collected for the project. So it wouldn't just be us saying, you guys need to give us 2 acres for a fire station. We would work it out with the developer so that it was a fair and equitable exaction as part of their development project.
Any other questions about police expenditures? No? So the last on the list there on the first page of public safety is the new fire station, and we've gotten some inquiries as to the status of that. So that RFP is going out this week. And as you recall, the council made the decision to go the design build route for that facility. We've already acquired the property. We have, $4.5 million from the state as well as about $4 million in the ambulance fund to build that project. The cost has risen a little bit. We were originally anticipating between $8 and $10 million. I think when at full build out, we're probably looking at closer to 11 million. But I think, assuming that the revenue in the ambulance fund continues to increase, we'll be able to offset those costs. Chief, I don't know if you have anything to add about that particular facility. Great, thank you. The next item, so Chief Alcaraz talked about portable radios and tasers. If there aren't any questions on those couple of items, I'll move on to the next page, which is Parks and Recreation. So Thompson Park currently in process with regard to the design. We're meeting regularly with the planners or with the architects and engineers of that project. And city engineer, I don't know if you want to give a status update as to where the plans are with that particular project.
Yeah, the plans have finished the SD phase, which is schematic development. So now we're in the CD phase, which is construction documents. And 2, we had a meeting on Friday with the architect. They'll be submitting their 50% plans in that CD phase, which allows us to review those, provide comments and modifications if needed, before they move on to finishing the plans, which is 90% phase within the next 4 weeks. I was on the phone with them before I walked in here and answering their questions and making sure they're headed in the right direction.
Thank you, City Engineer. With regard to that project, you'll notice that the total cost, we're looking at about $12 million to fully complete that. We have until a fiscal year or calendar year 2028 to complete that project based on the requirements of the grant. You know, we received about 4.4 million from the state as grant, so that means the rest of it is going to have to come from a different source. And so within the next couple of years, we'll be having discussions with the city council about where that money could come from, which whether it's our general fund reserve, which the general fund could support it, you know, whether the council wants to utilize that money for the park is, you know, a question. I think that has to be sort of discussed over the longer term. But also, you know, as we're putting in the sewer infrastructure for Amberwood, for Dinuba, you know, as the mayor mentioned, these development impact fees are going to be quite substantial, especially for parks. Is if the city council recalls, the development impact fee for parks was raised to about $7,400 several years ago, presumably, and you would know better than I, to be able to fund the Thompson or the Rockwell Pond Park project. And so as more units, I think we have probably close to, what would you say, Deputy City Manager, about 700 units in the pipeline over the next 3 to 4 years? Or just in general, citywide?
I mean, on paper, we have speculatively either in process or application filed. If you include the entirety of the Amberwood specific plan, 5,000 units on paper. And
Right.
so within the next 3 years, I would say between single family and multifamily, we at least have 600, probably over the next 2 to 3 years.
That could feasibly be constructed. And so, you know, I'm not saying that we're going to pay for the full balance of the park with just development impact fees, but that's going to be a big chunk of it. And so we'll have to look at other sources of revenue to finish that project. Luckily, you know, it's not a $24 million project. It's a $12 million project. And so our hands are a little bit less full with the amount that we're having to come up with. The next item on the, any questions about that?
Yes, question on that. So 12 million is the total is what we're estimating. And then out of that, 4.5 is coming from the state, right? The
Correct.
4.5. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
This is the 10-acre park, correct?
That's correct, yeah. And thank you for that question, Mayor. If you recall, that 10 acres was donated by a housing developer that has a project in that area. So that developer is being credited their impact fees, the value of that land. However, there are other projects that are coming online around that area that will not necessarily, you know, receive a credit. They'll have to either, you know, construct facilities or pay the impact fees. The next item on the list is the Pioneer Village improvements. And at the last council meeting, we saw the conceptual plan for the improvements that we have sort of developed that we can then phase out as the council asked for, to phase out so that we can be very intentional and systematic about how we're implementing those improvements. And our estimate right now is about $5 million for the entirety of the improvements. And we have submitted a request once again to our State Senator Caballero for funding for that particular grant, or excuse me, for that particular project. So we'll probably be hearing about that probably before the end of the fiscal year. And so the rest of that money can either come from, again, general fund, which the general fund can only support so much, but, you know, there's also development impact fees. There's TOT with, you know, more development happening, transit oriented taxes that are generated by hotels and tourism into the area can generate some funding for that as well. We're also looking at leveraging the community development block grant more effectively. So CDBG offers, for public facilities, I've seen some NOFAs go up to $8 million for public facilities. And so there's an opportunity for us to be competitive on some of those grants. And again, CDBG is so flexible. You can use it for affordable housing, you can use it for parks, you can use it for city halls, community centers, whatever it is. The problem is it's so competitive that you really have to have a project dialed in to really get any money. But I've submitted successful applications for CDBG. And so and I know that if you do have the right narrative and the right project, it can get awarded for sure. The other item on the list here is the resurfacing of the pickleball and tennis courts, and that also includes lighting at the pickleball courts. That's actually something that's in the works right now. So lights we've been requesting quotes from different lighting vendors, and so that's probably going to be the first portion of that project. You'll see 90,000 is being allocated in 25-26, but the lighting itself is probably going to happen either in the current fiscal year or in the next fiscal year, 24-25. Most likely, if we're not able to finish the project in the current fiscal year. Yep. With regard, and our community services director is not here today, and she would have a lot more to say about some of these projects. But if there's any questions that I'm not able to answer, I'll be happy to follow up with her and provide you an answer after later on in the week. But with regard to the perimeter fence at Brettlinger Park, our priority right now for that portion of the project is the fence that faces Rose Avenue. If you've driven by recently, you'll notice that fence is really badly deteriorated. And so we've obtained some quotes. Our Public Works Director has obtained some quotes from various contractors. And so not only are we replacing the fence, but we're also going to be redoing the sidewalk that's in front of the fence on Rose Avenue, because there's a portion that it's a wide sidewalk and then it narrows down to a more narrow sidewalk. And so we're going to make it all consistent to make it more walkable, ADA compliant. There's some utility poles that are in the right of way there that need to be relocated as well. So that'll be the first part of that improvement, but really the entire park needs to be refenced. And whether that's a combination of wrought iron or chain link or both, it still remains to be seen. But the portion that's most visible to the public from Rose Avenue is probably the most important one for us to do right now.
I just have a quick question.
Mhm.
Can vehicles park on the grass?
No, they should not be parking on the grass.
That's what I thought. Someone asked me that. They said, how are they supposed to get through when vehicles are parked up on the grass? Like there's an opening
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes you see all these cars are all parked up there. So they were asking, can vehicles park on the grass?
No, and if that's an issue, I'll make sure that Amy's aware of that, our community services director, so that if that is happening, that we can address it. So I'll make a note of that. Is it for specific events or is it for just in
No,
general?
generally, it's when they have like football practice or they have baseball going on. Or they might have like a tournament, you see vehicles parked up on the grass.
Okay. Thank you for letting me know. The next item that we have is the walking path at Shaper Park. I don't know how big of a priority, and that's going to be, part of the process of prioritizing projects, but I know our playground structures right now have been needing a lot of attention. And so we've been focusing on the more safety-oriented projects like replacing the playgrounds that potentially have hazards. But the walking path needs a little bit of an upgrade. And so because of the amount of linear feet, I can't off the top of my head recall how much linear feet of pavement that would require, but it's pretty substantial. And I actually think that $150,000 number is pretty low. So we'll be looking at that in the 25-26 fiscal year and see if there's money maybe in the TOT fund to be able to do that project. And then this is something that the council has talked about for, at least since I've been at Selma. It's a new community center that can house, events, banquets, that has a kitchen, that potentially could serve as a community center, or excuse me, as a senior center. And so I know that that has been something that the council has wanted to pursue for some time now. So we're estimating close to $20 million for that project in the next 10 years, 9 years or so. But again, CDBG is always a potential funding source for that particular type of facility. So we'll try to, and that's actually one of the things that that type of project is very well received by state officials, because it's easy to have a ribbon cutting at a community center, right? It's harder to have a ribbon cutting for a sewer line, that's in the ground. So these types of things do well when we're, sorry, David, city engineer. These are the types of projects that do well. So we'll keep that on the radar in future years. And then the Valley View Bike and Pedestrian Trail, we did receive a grant for that particular project, about $2.4 million. And then the city would be providing the rest either through impact fees or other infrastructure grants. And I don't know, is CMAQ a possibility for that project? City engineer?
Know about CMAQ, that's a congestion mitigation.
Okay.
Like spare the air.
That's what I was thinking, because it relieves, it keeps people from driving and instead jumping on their bikes to get to the park.
Because like repaving alleys.
Thank you. Do you have a status update on that particular project? I know we're going to talk about it tonight, but maybe we'll just save that for later on in the agenda. Any questions about that project, the bike trail on Valley View Bike Trail? So that goes from Valley View, Valley View, just across the street from the Salazar Center. And it goes southwest towards the site of Thompson Park. So it ends at Thompson, right around Saginaw, just south of Saginaw.
And if the COG folks can ever get that next batch of funding for the Golden State Corridor, there was a bike trail that was originally envisioned. It's just been really hard, from what I understand, to deal with the railroads and get there right away. But that might be a possibility down the line as well.
100%. Yeah, we were just having those discussions with the COG and the county, and you'll be hearing more about that probably at the next council meeting in terms of what the county or what the COG wants to do to be able to get that project done. And long story short, we may have to add it to our CIP down the line. But anyway, I'll save that for another day. And then, to continue the conversation about bike trails, we do want to continue the Valley View Bike Trail north, going up towards Dinuba along Orange Avenue, going in front of Abraham Lincoln Middle School. So where there's the canal, just west of where Amberwood is going to be built. That's a really good opportunity to cover up that canal for safety reasons, obviously. Absolutely. And also it's going to beautify the area because the weeds are out of control in the CID right away there. But that is a project that we feel can be done. And maybe, if things are looking better at that time for a school district and with the California state budget, there might be an opportunity for us to partner with the school district on that project, because it will be serving their students for sure.
Literally just driving down there and envisioning that.
Yeah.
what do you call it, a walkway down there.
And those tend to do really well, especially, from a funding perspective, because it's considered a safe route to school. Yeah, I think, lots of people in the community have voiced their concern about the safety issues there with that canal. Any other? Yeah.
Doing its own ATP plan. So would that be part of the active transportation plan as well?
Yes, so Safe Routes to School has been combined with ATP from a funding perspective. So whatever we put in our ATP, we can also include a Safe Routes to School component to it to make it
I had my
competitive.
first Safe Routes to School subcommittee meeting in a month, so I'll report back on that.
Oh, great, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you. And that's funding that is virtually, continuous and I don't want to say it's non-end, it doesn't end, but that's been one of the more consistent funding sources for the state of California because it's funded through the climate action plan or the ozone credits, what are they called? The carbon credits, carbon capture credits, cap and trade, thank you. And so they generate quite a bit of revenue from, industrial users who, they basically pay to be able to pollute more, right? So that's where that money comes from. Any other questions before I move on? I know I'm going pretty quickly here. Another thing that I should probably have prefaced is we have it on the agenda in the open session to be able to approve this item, this capital improvement program. But as you're thinking about what other projects might fit in here, you can always approve it with a caveat of adding another particular project, or we can bring it back if you want more time to think about it. But we're also planning on bringing it back with the adoption of the new fiscal year budget in May. So you'll see this again, even if, not everything that you would like to see is in the program right now. We can add to it for the next budget year. So the next page, streets and infrastructure, it's broken up into 3 pages. The format's a little different just because we have so many items. Our city engineer is an overachiever and was the first one to complete his 10-year project list. And what we're looking at for the most part is streets projects, but you also see, things like the Northwest Trunk Line and the Amberwood Trunk Line, Clarkson Lift Station. At the end of the day, not all of these are eligible for development impact fees because they're not growth inducing, they're more maintenance. But you'll see the first 2 items on the list there are preventative maintenance and rehabilitation. And there's an opportunity to start setting some money aside over time to be able to, do some seals, slurry seals. And, I don't want to try to sound like an engineer because I'm definitely not, but city engineer, feel free to elaborate on that if you wish.
Yeah, sure. So it's both a combination of maintenance, which is the either the fog seal or the slurry seal, versus just waiting until the road falls apart and we have to rebuild the whole thing. Really, that obviously has to be a part of the plan. So there are projects that we call reconstruction, just based on the pavement condition that we have now, but not waiting and only doing those types of projects. So streets that have been worked on in the last 4 or 5 years and rebuilt, they need to be slurried. They need to be, or at least fog sealed, to prolong that life cycle. So in this plan, there's maintenance pieces and reconstruction pieces based on analytical reports, based on input from Public Works, based on input from citizens as we map those issues. And that's what generates this plan. And what's not shown on these slides is my projected or hopeful source of the funds to fund these projects, from CMAQ to Measure C to SB1, local transportation funds. We have those written down as potential funding sources as we go after projects. So this last cycle, we went after CMAQ funds for projects that may be a year or 2 ahead. But if we can get funds for them, let's do that and get them in and get them done. But if those funds don't come through, they stay in the plan and we adjust as we get funds. So that's kind of why there's so many there, and I guess we're just hopeful after funds, and it tells us what funds that we need to be going after.
What's the lifespan on a fog seal?
Fog seal is really like a 2-year thing, where out here in front of City Hall, that was a fog seal. There's not a lot of material. It's just.
What about a slurry seal?
Slurry seal is more of that 5-year, 5 to 10-year application that fills in some cracks. There's actually some material that goes into it.
Just really quick, what was the additive that was add on Rose?
That project was before my time, but that's the one that goes all the way from McCall out to the hospital.
It goes from Danube, I mean, from,
Yeah, I'd have to look. I don't know. That wouldn't have been a fog seal. I think that was definitely a slurry. And it's not always like 100% one or the other. There's areas where you'll have a piece that's failing, so they'll cut out that piece of pavement, fix it with a full section, and then they'll slurry seal the whole thing.
So one of the things that I've noticed is in some of the neighborhoods, especially like Ladante Rose and Sundance Estates, is the roads have like the grass coming through them. Is that something that's part of this project, or is that something different?
Yeah, that would be like a slurry where we crack seal
Seals,
and then do a slurry seal, and there's a herbicide you have to put down to try and remove that.
Especially because those were vineyards before. So we're starting to see that in those neighborhoods.
Yeah, so
That one, on Nebraska where the gentleman didn't have his sidewalks, the sidewalks didn't continue. Which project is that part of?
those would be fall under more CDBG sidewalk connectivity projects. So whether, I know I have it in the list for this, like, year and next year, because those were actually applied for.
Right?
Any of the other street projects we have to do based on law, the ADA pieces, either at every corner. So like we did Barber Street or we did Stillman Street, there were pieces like ADA ramps got fixed while we did that street project. So they're
You have to tie
trying
it
to
in with
hit
those.
it as much as you can all at once. But those specific only sidewalk is, or at least currently, a good source, or we've been asking for CDBG money.
I met with the the interim executive director, and he was saying our city's been doing a really good job applying for grants, with COG. The only thing we didn't score on was the Surface Transportation Block Grant, the STPG. Is that really narrow in focus, and is it more demand?
They didn't tell me why. They won't give me an answer, so I have to kind of read between the lines. Best I can tell is I think it has to do with the RTP, which is the Rural Transportation Program. City of Selma, what's in the RTP was very limited. And so you score low if the streets that you're applying for aren't in that RTP. So I'm emailing COG asking, like, how do we update that? Because we need to include as many of those roads as possible. So that from reviewing the applications and trying to understand why that funding didn't come through, the only thing I could really tell where Selma compared to some of the other cities.
And I don't want to waste a lot of time here, but just heads up, he mentioned that he's he met with all the city people, and he's saying, be prepared for Measure C not to get renewed in 2 years, like have plans, and it's gonna be a major hit on the city. Can we start now looking for replacement funds on that? Because that's a major revenue source, that half-cent sales tax,
So, yeah, I think
just in case.
that is gonna be absolutely a conversation that we have, because that money needs to be kind of replenished from somewhere, right? Because there are projects that we have in the pipeline that are fully dependent on Measure C. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Mayor, but I think that's in the next maybe 60 to 90 days is probably a good time to have that conversation.
We can see how it impacts the CIP as well, because you got a bunch of street and road projects, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's gonna intersect, and hopefully there'll be some other funding too at the county and the state level that can replace that, but at this point, Just not seeing it.
Yeah, I will tell you that, state funding, you're a lot more competitive with it if you're considered to be a self-help jurisdiction where you're generating funding from other places, your own funding, right? And that's why Measure C was so important, because we were considered a self-help county because we did have that sales tax measure. So if that goes away, we'll lose that designation, the ability to compete for other funding. So, did you guys have something, Deputy City Manager?
One thing I wanted to also state is, the need for new development to maybe maintain roadways within their development themselves through the use of an assessment district like a community facilities district. I think the city has historically used landscape and lighting maintenance districts for maintenance of adjacent landscape around the subdivisions, but with projects like Amberwood that you want to keep maintenance of the roads, nice so that the project holds its value, or on future subdivisions, those subdivisions can be assessed a fee that is collected to pay for 5-year maintenance, 10-year maintenance, and 20-year replacement reconstruction. And it would just need to be established at the time the subdivision map is recorded. So
Which
staff,
Vineyard Estate is doing right now, aren't they? Like, they're like the only track that has that a special
they have
assessment
they
fee?
have a CFD and I think a LLMD. I think they have both, but they
For
can
both.
be integrated into a single district that is specialized. Like for Amberwood, they're gonna have parks, they're gonna have street trees down the middle. Each subdivision may have its own park or street trees or sidewalks. And having an assessment district set up to fund the ongoing improvements within that development, and then as new developments come on, them having their own assessment districts would allow the general fund not to support those maintenance and ensure that there's funding that we don't have to go out for grants or tax measure or whatever. And just that setup is much more reliant. It doesn't, rely on increased property rates. It doesn't require, all it is, it's set up in a manner that you say, we want to do X, Y, and Z. We want to do street maintenance, landscape maintenance, park maintenance, street lighting, what have you, and they assess that district, that neighborhood, that development based off of what the anticipated engineers costs are for preventative maintenance on a 5-year, 10-year, 20-year basis. So it's a enterprise fund, so it's away from the general fund, but it's specifically collected on the tax roll for that specific purpose. So we would use those funds for ongoing maintenance to remove the reliance on general fund dollars over time as development occurs.
Any other questions? I know there's a lot of information on this screen. Eventually, what we're gonna do is, and I'll get to this, is map it out so that you guys can see where all these projects are actually located, not just in terms of council districts, but also general locations. But I'll go ahead and move on. So our public works maintenance capital projects, there's only a couple there, but you'll notice the first one is downtown improvements. And we put that under public works maintenance because a lot of that is maintained by our public works team. That 24, 25 includes things that we've discussed recently, like lighting. We have the speakers budgeted in the current fiscal year that could potentially get rolled over depending on, how quickly our downtown strategic plan moves along. And so we have a total of $1 million budgeted or allocated in our CIP over the next 5 years, and obviously that can change. Our Public Works Corporation yard, our Public Works Director identified, and this was unbeknownst to me, the original plan for the building at Nebraska was for it to be a multiple-story building or 2-story building. And I don't know if council recalls those discussions or that project. I think it's been a good decade since that was built, but we're already outgrowing that building. Our Public Works maintenance crew, their break room, when they have meetings in there, I mean, it's kind of like standing room only. And so it's just a really, really tight quarters. And, especially with all of our equipment storage, we need some administrative offices in there. It's really tight. So, but again, it's not the highest priority because we have other things that we could that obviously need more attention. So we put that out in 32, 33 to be able to expand that facility. And then you'll notice PEMB stands for Pre-Engineered Metal Building. So we have a property that we own next to the railroad on East Front Street that used to be our Public Works courtyard. And right now it's just being used for storage. And there's an opportunity that we started to clean out everything that was being stored in there. I mean, it was artifacts from Pioneer Village. There was an old wagon there from Pioneer Village. There was evidence from the 1990s when Chief Alcaraz was still an officer. There was just documents, you know, that are just being stored there. And so we started kind of organizing that, destroying a lot of things that we don't need anymore and moving other things that are still salvageable. So that's still a lot of space. And if we can tear down some of those old buildings and maybe put up a pre-engineered metal building that will be suitable for our expanding public works team as the city grows. I mean, this isn't something that, you know, we would necessarily need right now, but as we're growing as a city, we'll need more staff, we'll need more equipment. But, you know, this is something that I think that is probably a good option at some point down the line. And then as far as equipment goes, you know, our Public Works Department in the past, you know, we're getting to the end of our useful life on a lot of our equipment. And some of it is becoming obsolete simply due to air quality requirements where the Central Valley Air Pollution Control District is saying you can't use this type of diesel engine anymore. You have to go to this tier. And so some of the stuff that you see on this list is a result of that, but also just increased maintenance plans or just better maintenance plans that we have now going forward. For example, the Rover CCTV equipment. Well, we don't have a whole lot of documentation for our storm drain lines as far as what's actually in there, what condition they're in. Michael Hahn, our Public Works Director, who's on his way, had to deal with a sinkhole last week on a storm drain line because of a old storm drain line that caved in that hadn't been properly maintained, that the city staff knew about quite a long time ago, and it was just never addressed. And all of a sudden now we have to spend, you know, $50,000 to repair it. But having the CCTV equipment that you see on line 3, for example, will help us identify some of those things ahead of time so that they don't end up costing quite so much to repair. The Vector truck, item number 4 on this list that you see here, is to basically be able to clean out all the storm drain lines and prevent flooding in neighborhoods, right? So that water doesn't get backed up as we have more and more of these major storm events. And then some of the other things are, you know, kind of just street maintenance things, pothole machines, a roller, a backhoe, skid steer. Those are things that any public works department just needs to have in their equipment list for things that come up. Because right now we're having to rent a lot of these things, and you know, for one-off things it makes sense, but when you start needing them and renting them every week, you know, at some point it makes more sense just to purchase them, right? So we think by the end of fiscal year 29, we'll be to the point with our equipment where you know, we'll have most of what we need to be able to maintain our streets pretty adequately and our storm drain system. And then just to continue the equipment list, we have mower, transfer truck. This information boards is a conversation we started having recently as we're increasing our communication with the public as these events are happening. There's just a need to make sure, and this was made clear with all the Caltrans projects, the Golden State Boulevard project, about notifying motorists adequately about things going on, whether it's construction, whether it's you know, if special events going on or what have you. An information board is going to be quite useful for us to have. And so any questions on this equipment list before I move on? Okay. And just a couple items here for administration. Obviously, we don't require a ton of capital projects. But as I mentioned before, the ADA parking lot, that's the park and ride lot across the street from the current police station. And then a new city hall. We're virtually at capacity here at City Hall with our employees. That's being compounded by the fact that our recreation staff is here because the senior center is out of commission until about July, August. But, even then, I think within the next 5 years, if the development, happens as we expect it to, we'll probably need some additional staff to be able to support the services that we're providing to the city. So, we're anticipating about an $18 million project, for a new city hall. Obviously, that's dependent on the location and the cost of that new location. So we'll update that as the council sees fit and as we start getting closer to a point where we can look at funding that. So all in all, not including storm drain improvements that were not included in this presentation, we're looking at about $150 million over the next 10 years of capital improvement projects. That's about an average of maybe $15 million per year, which it's not necessarily a lot of money if you're able to leverage all the funding sources that are out there, which means grants, budget, state budget earmarks, federal budget earmarks, Measure C, bond measures like our Measure S, obviously general fund reserves, not reserves, excuse me, general fund revenue from property taxes, from sales tax revenue. So the good thing is we have quite a few funding streams. The bad thing is that costs of capital projects generally outpace the increase in revenues to the city. So at some point, we're going to need to, actually every year throughout these next 10 years and beyond, we're going to have to probably find a way to make ends meet if we want to make these projects happen. And then the development impact fee study is currently in process, and if council approves these projects tonight, they'll be included in the DIF study for those that are appropriate to include in there, minus the maintenance projects. And then I did want to take a couple of minutes for our city engineer to talk about how we, and because this has been a question in the past, how we arrive at prioritizing these projects, especially the streets projects, with regard to, the funding that's allocated every year to different neighborhoods. How are we arriving at that prioritization? And so, city engineer, if you don't mind just taking a few minutes to discuss the information that's on this slide.
Sure, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, but we use multiple sources of information to help us create these projects and plan them over a 10-year period. The city uses a pavement management system. It's called Street Saver. It has every segment of roadway in the city input into it. It's a computer program. We maintain the pavement condition index is a number that we monitor over time. And it's an analytical tool that most cities use to maintain, to see the condition of their streets. And it's something that's come to council in the past. You've approved the use of it and approved kind of the direction of how much maintenance and how much reconstruction goes into that program. So that's a computer program. It spits out a report. It's not always perfect, but we use it as a tool, and it's a good tool to use. The other pieces that we use is the public works maintenance workers, inspectors that are out there every day. We're taking calls. There's an issue at different street segments. The public works is on the ground every day. So they're communicating back to us. We're mapping those communications so that we can memorialize it and use it as we look at the next budget to see which streets are getting the most, having the most issues, having the most maintenance issues. So we're mapping those work orders and looking at which neighborhoods could benefit by having a new street project and no longer being, having to have a maintenance issue. So that's another important piece. As citizens call in and complain and rightfully notice an issue or a pothole or have a problem, those are being mapped as well. So we're looking at where people are calling in and having issues. It may be something that Public Works goes out and fixes right away, but that could help or be removed from the maintenance issue if we end up maintaining the full street. So we look at that piece of information. And then as we look at funding sources and ways to accomplish these projects, we are overlaying, the state of California has a mapping system that certain roads are on their mapping system. And if you are applying for funding in those streets, you can score better. I mentioned the RTP for the county. We need to make sure that our main roads are in that system. So that's one thing on my list right now. But as we overlay all of those different pieces and we can begin to see where the problems are, then we begin to create these projects on a long-term basis. And there are things that come up during the year that are either emergency issues or issues we didn't know about that we will be adding to this plan, either in the next year or the next 2 years. So there aren't, we can understand what we can and the computers can tell us certain things, but we do need to adapt and adjust as we go. So that's kind of our job. And then the last thing to say is all of these pieces are put together, and then we actually have our engineers or our public works inspectors, they go out and they walk the project. That I may have come up with a potential project, they actually walk it and they will provide feedback back to us. That really helps narrow down, is this a full reconstruction or how can we be most effective with the funding and not just follow the computer or, we need to look at it. So that is a big important piece that we look at before we bring a project to the council or ask for that funding for the budget.
Sounds perfect. Any questions on what the city engineer indicated?
A quick one, the street signs, is that included in one of the pages here? I know we've been working on that for several years to update the street signs that are really blurry around town. If you look at Floral, you can barely read them.
Talking about street names.
Yeah, street names.
names.
I'll address that. First off, I apologize for not being here on time. I was miscommunication on where I needed to be and when I needed to be there, so I apologize. We are addressing street signs on a regular basis. Mayor, there are so many around town that have expired. What the DOT's recommendation is to replace those, but we're limited for what resources we have. So we have on the new budget and whatnot, we have added more money in to try to address those in a more expedient way. But we are currently replacing signs around town randomly that we are working with David and Yamabi and Horn to identify those signs. That's part of our GIS program and the software stuff that we're looking at. So we are looking at other ways of creating a program that is more of a consistent maintenance program for those signs. So that is part of what we're looking at for the GIS system and what we need to collaboratively collect the data that we need for street, sidewalk signs. So we are working on those. You might not notice them because it's not like a whole bunch at one time. We just do them as we can. One, give the staff the time to actually address that because we're making our own signs. And then also getting the resources for that. So
And what budget, what part of the budget would that be?
and that's coming out of the street maintenance budget for the street maintenance department.
All right,
Yes.
thank you for that update.
Yes.
And as the council recalls, I mean, that was a project that we started last year. And before Director Han came on board, our Public Works crew was following that, the street sweeping route as their programmed sign replacement route. And so, that's just something that I think we'll make sure to prioritize going forward because The resources can be allocated. It's just a matter of directing the resources to that because it is a big need and it's something we were focusing on previously. And I do agree that it's something that we need to continue. So, yeah, thank you for that question and we'll make sure to keep focusing on that. My next slide, and I know we're running short on time, but I just wanted to show the council once the CIP is approved, we will be loading a new system that we've developed, and let me see if I can share this. That's going to make it more, the goal is to be transparent about how our capital budget is being spent, just our budget in general, in this case, our capital budget. But we plan on publishing this online dashboard for the public to be able to see, first of all, what is CIP, right? And what does it pay for? What kind of projects go into CIP? You'll notice public safety, infrastructure, downtown, staffing, parks and facilities. Actually, staffing is not part of CIP, but we'll correct that. And so we'll talk about general fund, impact fees, everything that goes into the CIP. The public will also be able to see the status of all of the projects that are approved by the council. So let's say, 19, and this is data that is outdated and some of it is no longer relevant. We just used it to create this demonstration site. But 19 projects under construction, 17 are in design, 0 are delayed. And so they'll be able to visually get an idea of how many projects are in the works at any given time. And so staff will be updating this regularly. The next tab would be a map of where all the projects are located. And so the public will be able to click on a specific project on the map and get information as to the status, the description, what fiscal year it was budgeted, which department it falls into, which council district it's in, and some other information that we can add or remove as necessary. But we think this is going to be a real game changer for the public to be able to see how their public funds are being utilized from a capital project perspective. And so this is newly funded projects, then we'll have a tab for active projects and we'll see, okay, how much was budgeted for that project, how much has been spent, what the funding source is, and again, maps. And then finally, we'll have a tab for completed projects. And this is all, kind of in the works right now, but by the time you see it, when the next budget is adopted, it'll be fully built out. We just wanted to make sure the council is aware that this is what we're going to be making available to the public and to the council.
Is that something Patrick would be tasked with updating?
No, Patrick is not our GIS person. Actually, community development and our city engineer are tag teaming this project.
All that fun.
So Patrick, for those of you who aren't aware, is our internal IT technician. And so he mostly services our internal technology needs. Any questions on this?
Good stuff.
Great.
Mhm.
Well, one more slide, and then I'll end my presentation. So as I mentioned, let me go ahead and share the presentation again. What staff is proposing as the next steps is to approve this CIP project list, and if there's any revisions, we can make them. Adopt the attached resolution, and then, like I mentioned, we'll update the online dashboard and present it with the fiscal year 24-25 budget presentation. And that is all we have.
Great, thank you for that. Thank you, the city manager and staff, for a great job. Really appreciate all your hard work, making it clear and concise. And this is a great roadmap for the future of the city. Thank you again. And with that, we have to go into closed session. So we ask everybody who's got nice and comfortable to get back up and leave. It won't be too long, and we'll ask you to come back in. All right, this is a special meeting. And with that, we will adjourn this closed session. And we'll open. Where's our next one? We will close the Selma City Council special meeting, which started at 4:30. And we will now open our next Selma City Council special meeting, which is commencing at 5:39 in the, do I need to go through just like I do for all the meetings, the preamble? Okay. Do we still need to call roll, all that stuff? Okay. So with that, given the limitations of time, we will recess into our closed session. The topic will be the conference with legal counsel, existing litigation, name of case, Caglia Environmental versus City of Selma, case number 23 CECG 04734. And then a conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, significant exposure to litigation pursuant to 54956.9B, one case. Okay.